Hey everyone, how's it going? Azren the Language Nerd here. Hope you're doing very well. I want to try something a little bit different today, which I'm calling Ask the Language Nerd. Basically what happens every single week, I get lots and lots of questions on Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook and YouTube and my Anchor podcast. People call in, like lots and lots of different questions. And so what I want to do is I want to start going through some of the questions that I've received this week and some of the replies that I've given so that a lot of you can actually benefit from them as well. If you want to actually submit any questions for Ask the Language Nerd, you're welcome to do so on any social media platform that I'm on: Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Anchor, YouTube. I'll put them all on the screen. So with that aside, let's jump right in here. My perspective is the following. I think first and foremost, that is possible. However, you need to make sure that you're putting in the appropriate number of study hours. I find in my experience from what I've seen, most people probably only study their foreign language about maybe 1 hour to 5 hours a week. And that's not really, if you want to get to that low conversational level in 2 years or less, you're probably going to need way more hours than that. I'd probably recommend something closer to 15, call it 10 to 20 hours a week. The second piece of this advice is I think it makes sense, it actually definitely makes sense, to be strategic with what you're studying. You have to study topics, vocabulary, and grammar points that are going to allow you to actually become conversational. So I would think through some of the common conversation topics that you actually have and the types of conversations that you have, and try to master those specific scenarios first. So I'll give you some examples. Commonly, you need to be able to talk about yourself. Your name, what you do for work, things like maybe even your age, maybe where you live, your family, things like that. Even things like what your plans are on the weekend. Things like what you did during the day, what you did last weekend. A lot of those types of small talk conversations can often be a good place to start, meaning that you're going to need to know present tense in whatever language. In French, for example, present tense. You'll need to know your passé composé, your past tense, and you'll need to know your future. You'll need to know how to talk about the future. Those three grammar tenses are incredibly important for that conversational aspect. If your student is not studying outside of class and they're not progressing due to a lack of effort, the first thing you have to do is you might have to actually have a little bit of empathy, because they might, maybe, I don't really know, you don't know everyone's life situation. They might be really busy, they might be prioritizing other things, they might not really care about the language, maybe it's like a minor importance. Like, there's a lot of factors to think about as to why they're not studying outside of the class. The other thing to think about is maybe you're a bad teacher. Maybe you suck and you're just not doing things in an interesting way. And so they don't want to study. They don't want to study outside of class. Maybe they don't know what to study outside of class. I've seen that a lot now. A lot of people are like, yeah, I'd love to do stuff, but they don't know what to do. And the stuff you give them is boring homework they don't like. Or who knows, there's a million and one factors it could be. But at the end of the day, I think you as a teacher, in my perspective, have to take accountability for your students' learning. Because otherwise, if they're not progressing and it's due to a lack of effort, there's a problem. You're wasting your time in your lessons because they're not learning. You're wasting your students' time in the lesson because they're not learning. And worst of all, or maybe equally bad, you're wasting their money and because they're not learning. You're wasting all three. What I usually do in this kind of scenario is I usually go, hey, look, we've studied for this much time, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. We've barely made any progress. Here's the facts to show you we haven't made progress. You still struggle with my name is this. I've seen it happen. You still struggle with this. That's not normal. We gotta change something. Here's what I think needs to happen. Lay out some kind of a plan. I even lay out day-to-day plans. For example, I have a student, I tell the student, man, you need to write me a daily paragraph. Every day, write me a paragraph, short paragraph, I'm gonna leave some feedback in it. Then, when I see you in person, we're gonna discuss, we're gonna do things in more depth. If you're not willing to do this minimum step, probably better that you find another teacher. That's usually how I approach it, because the reality is I don't want to waste your time, don't want to waste my time, don't want to waste your money. But also what I want to avoid is I don't want you to give me all this time, all this money for like a year. Let's say a year later you go, Mal, Azren, I've been doing this for a year and I barely can say, hi, my name's Azren, I'm from Canada. I can barely even do it. Why the heck have I been giving you my money and my time? Like, this has been a freaking waste. I don't want that scenario. If lack of effort is the problem, right, you need to address that quickly, right? You need to make sure you fixed it, because otherwise it's going to turn around and bite you in the butt at some point or another, Or even if it doesn't, you're just wasting everyone's time and wasting money and just a big waste. Children's TV shows, even if you don't understand all the words, usually there's lots of expressive things happening, and you can understand with context what certain words and certain phrases, certain things mean. So I'm a big fan of that. And also on a similar note, any kind of very expressive content is a fantastic thing to be using. For example, I love how-to videos. How-to videos in a foreign language is amazing because as they're speaking, they're showing you something. They're showing you, you have a very clear visual as they're speaking. So if they point and say, you need to sew, you need to sew directly, directly on the edge of the pillow, on the seam, and they're pointing at the seam, you're like, oh, that's a seam. Oh, seam, okay. It's very visual. You can learn a lot doing that. So I'm a huge fan of any kind of how-to videos, children's television, any very expressive content. I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of experience with this. I don't have a lot. I have a little bit. I have worked with some people of dyslexia issues who struggle with dyslexia. Here's kind of my perspective. There's a couple different things from my limited experience. Number one, and actually to be honest, I haven't experienced this, but I've heard it. I've heard that there's different fonts and specific colors for text that dyslexic people find easier to read. I haven't tested a lot with that, but I've heard that. But one thing I have seen work with one particular student that I had is using different learning styles. So using learning styles that are not necessarily directly tied to writing, right? So for example, using music. Can you use music? Can you use pictures? There's lots of other resources. Can you rely on auditory skills? Can you rely on tactile learning? There's lots of different strategies like that you can use that are not directly tied to reading and writing. And I think that's kind of the best approach based on the limited experience I have. That's really all I could probably say on the topic, but hopefully that's helpful. When it comes to understanding people like rappers or like rock stars or interviews, maybe some scenarios where people don't speak extremely clearly, or maybe they're using lots of slang, or their pronunciation isn't fantastic, right? Those kinds of things should be one of the last types of things that you're trying to actually understand, because that is like one of the most advanced types of content that one could engage with. And what's actually interesting is a lot of people actually naturally, for some reason, jump to that first. They go, oh yeah, I'm learning Spanish. I'm gonna try and watch this following TV show in Spanish. It's like, yes, maybe it's good, but for a lot of you, you're not gonna capture anything. It's just too hard. So I'd much rather, if you're like watching interviews and stuff and you're like, this is too hard for me, change to something easier. Switch to something easier to understand. Engage with stuff that's a little bit challenging. Don't use content that is way too challenging, because it's going to discourage you. It's going to be hard to capture stuff from it. It's like if you want to learn like some advanced mathematics, like calculus or something like that. If you take a 6-year-old, right, a 6-year-old child and go, hey, let's do calculus. You can't. They can barely do 5 plus 2. Like, they can't even do it, right? So you can get to calculus, but you have to work your way up. First you gotta do 5 plus 5, then you gotta do basic multiplication, divisions. You gotta work your way up, and eventually you can start to do calculus. So it's kind of a similar concept. You can't just jump into this really challenging content that's like, rappers and like rock stars and like, oh my god, you're not gonna understand. It's way too hard. That's like calculus level stuff here. Go down to like 5 plus 5 to start. Then if you do 5 plus 5, do 5 times 5. Do your multiplications. Do the easy stuff, right? Easier. Work your way up slowly, then eventually you'll be able to get to the point where you understand the rappers and the more advanced types of content. And so what I love is any turn-based game. So Crazy 8, Jenga, really any turn-based game, because you can add language elements very easily. So I was telling this person here, actually, we were talking about using things like Crazy 8s, and every single turn, when it's your turn, you have to say something in the language you are learning. This is fantastic. It's a good way to do a review. So if you're a teacher, let's say you just learned weather terms, for example, you can play the card game, which is fun, and when the student gets the card, when it's their turn, they have to put down the card and say, I like winter, for example. That makes them practice the word winter. Or, I like the rain, or rain sucks, or whatever, right? And it's making them practice all these weather words. So I love any turn-based games. I think it's a fantastic thing to be incorporating. Even if you're at game night, you're playing games with friends, even if they're not learning whatever language, do it in your head. Be like, okay, I have maybe you're playing like, I don't know, you're playing like some card game, you have like a 4 of spades, in your brain be like, I have a 4 of spades. Try and say that to yourself in your target language, like talk to yourself with it. Very, very phenomenal strategy. The resources are not overly important. It doesn't fully matter what resources you choose. However, what I would rather you do is find one primary resource you like. Maybe it's a YouTube channel, a textbook, a specific teacher, like some, whatever it is. Pick some resource that's your primary resource. But also, I would have at least 1 to 3 secondary resources. So maybe about 70% of your time is spent on the primary resource that you like, whatever it is. And 30% of your time is split on, again, between 1 to 3 other resources to have that input from other places. I find that if all of your information is coming from one place, it's hard for me to explain why, but that doesn't feel like the best strategy. It is way better to have a couple of different resources you're using because it gives you different perspectives. It gives you different ideas. It gives you different ways to think about that language. Like one practical way this could manifest itself is maybe your one resource is teaching like Spain Spanish, okay? And if that's all you study and you don't have any other resources, right, you might not have any clue about Latin American Spanish or Mexican Spanish or any other Spanish from other countries. But if you also have a second textbook that you use, or if you have like a tutor that you use sometimes from Mexico, if you have like, listen to some TV shows or whatever, it's gonna introduce you to other elements that you're not getting from your primary source. And those other elements are very healthy. Not to mention that when you're switching resources, often you're gonna encounter different learning styles. You're gonna engage different learning styles that maybe you're not with your primary resource. So for example, maybe your primary resource is a textbook, okay? And maybe the secondary resource you use is listening to music. Or maybe it's listening to music and, watching some simple TV shows or television shows, right? That kind of thing, it's gonna engage different parts of your brain, which is only going to accelerate your learning. So we're gonna wrap up there. There's a lot more questions and comments, things like that. We didn't even touch actually YouTube comments or any YouTube questions, but we've done a lot as it is. It's gonna be a pretty long video, so we'll wrap it up there. Yeah, as I said before, please let me know any questions, anything you want to include in Ask the Language Nerd. Welcome to do so, and I will include them. Hit me up. I'll put the social networks on the screen of where you can hit me up. And yeah, we'll chat later. Bye for now, guys. Hope you liked this.